Welcome to The Last Climb. I'm Alex, and today we're looking into a summit attempt where a guide's false claims and overconfidence led to a fatal outcome. It wasn't just poor judgment, it was a refusal to question decisions that seemed confident, even with warning signs already there. What started as a simple team-building hike quickly unraveled into something the mountain didn't care about. It was the evening of September 13th, 2016. When 3 rented passenger vans rolled off the gravel road into El Chalten, Argentina, a remote trekking town at the edge of the southern Patagonian Andes. The 22 employees of a Santiago-based software company arrived the same evening, where they were met by Rachel Denton, the guide contracted to lead their summit attempt in the Cerro Torre Fitzroy Massif the following morning. Rachel, 34, a Denver-based former yoga and fitness instructor, presented herself as a certified professional mountain guide. I kept digging into her background while researching this, and nothing about it matched what she was presenting outwardly. Subsequent investigation would later confirm she held no guiding credentials, had no formal wilderness medical training, had never led paying clients in the backcountry, and had reviewed a forecast warning of severe conditions above 12,000 feet the next day without informing anyone. The group she greeted ranged from 24 to 58 years old and worked in standard office roles: developers, project managers, sales staff, and HR personnel. Most had limited outdoor experience, with only a few having hiked at moderate elevations. None had mountaineering experience, and several were already feeling mild altitude effects at Lake City's 8,671 feet. The trip had been arranged months earlier as a corporate team-building retreat, intended to be fully guided and safety managed. Participants were led to believe a certified expert would handle all route planning and risk decisions. The guiding company appeared professional and legitimate online, advertising certified instruction, wilderness medical training, and extensive guiding experience. Its website included testimonials and polished descriptions of successful summit expeditions. The HR director completed the booking for $14,800 without verifying credentials directly with the certifying body or requesting documentation from the guide. I think this is one of those decisions that feels small at the time, but it quietly sets everything else in motion. The reservation was made based on the information presented to her, and the climb proceeded as scheduled. None of the credentials on that website existed. The country's professional mountain guiding certification body maintains a publicly searchable registry of credentialed guides. Its certification process involves multi-year training, evaluated field assessments, and formal examinations. Rachel Denton's name does not appear in that registry, and I went and checked this myself in the same way investigators would have. There's no ambiguity here at all. She had no enrollment, no assessed field training, and no verified contact with the organization. The Wilderness Emergency Medical credential she listed, a 70 to 80 hour certification commonly required for remote guiding, was also false. She had never completed it. Her claim of over a decade of guiding experience had no factual basis. She had never led paying clients in any outdoor setting before September 14th, 2016. The testimonials on her website were fabricated. Her actual experience was limited to 3 personal ascents of beginner-friendly trekking peaks in southern Patagonia, all heavily trafficked, non-technical routes with maintained trails and regular tourist traffic. She completed them alone on recreational trips. She had never guided anyone else in the mountains and had never been on the Fitzroy or Cerro Torre approaches. The peaks of the Fitzroy-Cerro Torre Massif rise sharply above El Chalten, forming one of the most exposed and weather-volatile mountain systems in the southern Andes. Established trekking routes in the region quickly leave treeline and remain in fully exposed alpine terrain for most of the ascent, with no shelter once above vegetation. In stable summer conditions, it is non-technical and accessible to fit hikers with basic altitude experience. Above the treeline, however, there is no shelter or protection from weather. This is the part most people don't fully grasp until they've actually been above treeline in bad conditions. In deteriorating conditions, descent is the only option, and in low visibility on unfamiliar terrain, that option becomes unreliable. Mid-September in the southern Patagonian Andes is basically that awkward in-between stretch where summer is already fading out, but winter is starting to creep in. The usual afternoon storms that hikers plan around don't show up the same way anymore. Instead, you start getting these early season systems coming in from the northwest. And the problem with them is timing. They don't wait for the afternoon. They can roll in during the morning. bringing heavy wet snow, strong steady winds, and visibility that can drop fast once you're up high. Out in open terrain, there's not much room to adjust once it starts. The weather forecast had already flagged a strong frontal system moving in from the southwest, expected to reach the mountains between late morning and midday. The Regional Meteorological Authority warned of heavy snowfall above treeline, sustained winds of 45 to 65 miles per hour, rapidly dropping temperatures, extreme wind chill, and visibility under 100 meters on exposed ridgelines. Browser history later recovered from Rachel Denton's laptop shows she reviewed the forecast the night before the climb. Despite the severity of the conditions, she did not cancel or postpone the hike, adjust gear recommendations, or notify authorities. She closed her laptop and went to bed. Earlier that evening, during the pre-hike briefing over dinner, she told the group the next day would be mostly clear, maybe with a bit of cloud cover in the afternoon. Basically standard September mountain weather. She suggested layering up with a base layer, a fleece, and a light shell jacket. For footwear, she recommended trail runners or low-cut hiking boots. She also said the climb was pretty manageable for most fitness levels, that she had done the route several times before, and that she'd have a satellite phone with her in case anything came up during the day. There was no satellite phone in her pack. That single missing piece changes the entire safety picture for a group that size. The pack inventory reconstructed during the investigation contained 2 Mylar emergency blankets, a small standard first aid kit, a handheld GPS unit purchased 3 weeks earlier with no documented practice, 2 liters of water, and a granola bar. 2 emergency blankets for 22 people, ascending above 14,000 feet in mid-September, under publicly forecast severe conditions. Her only communication device was a personal cell phone that would lose signal shortly after leaving the trailhead at 11,400 feet. No emergency plan was filed with local authorities. No route, no return time, no search protocol, standard guiding procedure not followed. The group woke before dawn on September 14th. Several reported mild altitude effects, headaches, fatigue, and slowed alertness common above 8,000 feet for unacclimatized visitors. Rachel dismissed it as normal. Outside the lodge, the sky was fully overcast with no visible stars. A low, dense cloud layer sat over the peaks, carrying a heavy, moisture-laden feel often associated in the San Juans with incoming weather. Most of the group had no experience reading it. One participant, a software developer with recreational hiking experience, noted it felt unusually low and heavy. A coworker reminded him the guide said it would clear. The vans left before sunrise in complete darkness. As they drove higher into the mountains, nothing really changed outside. The sky stayed fully covered, no sign of dawn breaking through, no stars visible at all. Phone signals started dropping out along the upper dirt road. By the time they reached the trailhead, it was already noticeably colder, sitting just below freezing. The air still carried that same weighted stillness from the lodge. Rachel handed out trekking poles, 1 to each person, and got the group organized at the trailhead sign. She didn't fill out the trail register with their names, route, or expected return time. Headlamps went on, everyone gathered loosely behind her, and they started up the trail in the dark. The trail began through the broad floor of a meadow before climbing into a rocky drainage that steepened as elevation rose. Headlamps swept across uneven ground and narrow pools of amber light. Rachel set a pace from the front that was brisk for a mixed fitness group at this elevation, fast enough that the column began spreading within the first few hundred yards. The stronger hikers stayed close behind her. The mid-level participants held position in the column's middle section. The 2 oldest members of the group, a 57-year-old and a 58-year-old, both from the company's sales team, began falling toward the rear almost immediately, moving at a pace that was steady for them, but measurably slower than the group average. By the end of the first mile, they were several hundred feet behind the main cluster. The gap received no acknowledgement from the front of the column. This is one of those small things that doesn't seem important at the time, but it stacks up fast in situations like this. Rachel continued at pace. The first gray light of dawn emerged slowly as the group climbed toward 12,400 feet and the trail exited treeline into open alpine terrain. The landscape materialized around them in low, flat light, a wide, bare, rocky expanse with no vegetations taller than ankle height and unobstructed sightlines in all directions. In clear conditions, this elevation on Uncompahgre's northeast approach offers a broad view of surrounding San Juan summit. On the morning of September 14, 2016, it offered a clear and unobstructed view of what was building to the northwest. In that direction, a heavy dark cloud stretched across the horizon, sitting unusually low, almost level with the peaks instead of high above them. Its base looked flat and thick, not like light morning haze or the softer gray of clearing clouds, and not like the typical white buildup you see before afternoon storms. It was dark, low, and moving sideways across the mountains, with a clear sense of a weather front pushing in with force behind it. Someone with real mountain weather experience, especially in the San Juans in September, would have picked up on that pattern pretty quickly. Rachel Denton was leading at the front of the group, facing uphill to the east. There's no indication from witnesses or evidence that she ever turned to look toward the northwest where the weather was building. The two slowest hikers were still several hundred feet behind everyone else at this point, and that gap wasn't addressed or corrected. By the time the group reached roughly 13,200 feet in the early morning, winds had increased to 20 to 25 miles per hour, and temperatures on the exposed slope had dropped to around 21 degrees Fahrenheit. Ahead lay the Northeast Ridge, a long, fully exposed spine of rock with no vegetation, windbreaks, or shelter along its length. A dense cloud mass that had been visible on the northwest horizon earlier in the ascent had continued moving in and was now significantly closer, lower, and more compact. Its approach toward the ridge was increasingly apparent as conditions steadily deteriorated. 3 members of the group stopped at this elevation and told Rachel they wanted to turn around. The exchange is described consistently in both surviving witness accounts gathered during the investigation. Rachel was dismissive. She told the 3 that the summit was less than an hour away, that the wind was normal for exposed terrain at this elevation, and that conditions were not a concern. 2 of the 3 accepted this and continued upward. The third, a 41-year-old HR staff member who had been watching the sky since the van ride and found the wind at 13,200 feet more persuasive than any reassurance, said she was turning back and began her descent. Rachel did not assign anyone to descend alongside her. She did not adjust the group's formation, reduce the pace, or establish any check-in protocol. The woman began descending alone, without escort, while the remaining 21 members of the group continued upward under Rachel's direction toward the exposed ridge. At approximately 13,800 feet, the northwest system had closed to overhead. The cloud mass was no longer in the middle distance. It sat directly above and pressed into the ridgeline, moving with a speed and density that made the approaching deterioration unmistakable to anyone paying attention to the sky. The 33-year-old developer approached Rachel at this elevation and made his concern explicit. Both surviving witnesses later confirmed in their accounts that he identified the cloud formation by color, height, and lateral movement pattern and stated that it did not resemble afternoon mountain buildup. He asked whether the group should reverse and descend. Rachel told him she had seen conditions like this before and to keep moving. That kind of reassurance only works if the conditions actually match the experience behind it. There was no shelter at 13,800 feet. The terrain was open rocky ridge, no overhang, no depression, no topographic feature in any direction, offering any meaningful protection from weather approaching from the northwest. The nearest tree line was approximately 2,400 vertical feet below the group's current position. The summit was several hundred feet above. The 21 remaining hikers continued upward. The storm reached the northeast ridge of Uncompahgre Peak at approximately 9:15 a.m. Everything up to this point has been building toward this moment, without anyone really being able to stop it anymore. It arrived the way northwest fronts arrive in the San Juans in September, not with the gradual buildup of an afternoon convective storm, not with a warning rumble or an overhead darkening that provides a decision window, but with speed and completeness. In approximately 8 minutes from the moment the front crossed the ridge, sustained winds rose from 25 miles per hour to 50, with gusts approaching 65. Snow began, not powder, not flurries, but horizontal, moisture-laden, heavy snow, driven at high velocity by the wind, carrying enough water content to penetrate outerwear on contact and saturate insulation layers beneath. Within 20 to 30 minutes, visibility fell below 50 feet within 15 minutes of the front's full arrival on the ridge. The temperature dropped sharply. Wind chill values fell toward negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. The 21 hikers were distributed across approximately a quarter mile of exposed ridge. At 50 miles per hour of sustained wind and near zero visibility, the formation dissolved. The people at the front of the column could neither see nor hear the people at the rear. Wind noise at this velocity overwhelms vocal communication beyond a few feet in any direction. Visual contact across the quarter-mile line of hikers disappeared within the first minutes of the storm's full intensity. The group did not fragment gradually. It broke apart under force that its configuration, its equipment, and its leadership had no mechanism to address. Rachel reached for the GPS unit. The device required menu navigation, demanding functional fine motor control. The precise interaction with small controls that cold, unprotected hands lose quickly. At negative 20-degree wind chill, dexterity deteriorates in lightweight gloves within minutes of sustained exposure, and her gloves provided lightweight liner protection. She could not navigate the device's interface in the conditions she was standing in. Her iPhone had no carrier signal. She had no satellite communicator. She gave verbal instructions to the hikers immediately around her, but no radio system, no signal protocol, and no emergency action plan existed to reach the people distributed across the rest of the ridge. There was nothing, no tool, no plan, no communication channel, capable of reaching the individuals now separated by more than 100 feet of driving, zero visibility snow. Within roughly an hour of the storm's arrival, the 21 remaining hikers broke into at least 7 isolated clusters spread across the upper terrain. Whiteout conditions reduced visibility to only a few body lengths. Cairn markers along the route became indistinguishable under accumulating snow. With no visible landmarks, no functional navigation, and no communication between groups, movement became unguided and largely instinct-driven. I remember sitting with this part of the report and just thinking how fast things can fall apart once visibility is gone up there. The clothing they wore was not sufficient for the conditions. A base layer, fleece mid-layer, and light shell can perform adequately in calm alpine weather. But in sustained 50-mile-per-hour wind with wet horizontal snow, the shell quickly loses wind resistance once saturated. The fleece beneath it retains moisture and loses most insulating ability when wet. Footwear such as trail runners and low-cut hiking boots offers little protection in sustained cold and wet exposure, leaving feet rapidly vulnerable to heat loss. And honestly, this is where it hits me. It's not even bad gear. It just wasn't built for what actually showed up that morning. Under these combined conditions, wet clothing, high wind, sub-zero wind chill, and extreme elevation, hypothermia follows a predictable progression. Within 30 to 45 minutes, uncontrolled shivering begins, followed by slowed cognition, impaired fine motor control, and reduced ability to assess direction or terrain. As core temperature drops further, confusion and disorientation increase, and sustained purposeful decision-making deteriorates as the body prioritizes core survival. Some hikers tried to turn back and descend, but on the northeast ridge, you really need to know exactly which direction you're going. The ridge slopes back toward the trailhead to the northeast, but it also drops off to the northwest and west into completely different valleys. In a full whiteout, with no cairns or landmarks visible, at least 3 groups ended up heading the wrong way, moving down the far side of the mountain and further away from where help could reach them. 2 people made a different decision. The 29-year-old software developer and the 52-year-old project manager had been positioned near the center of the column when the storm arrived and the group began fragmenting. As visibility collapsed and the wind made coordinated group movement impossible, they reached a shared conclusion: stop moving entirely. Their reasoning, reconstructed from their accounts to investigators in the days following the event, was straightforward. Any attempt to navigate the ridge in zero visibility carried a high probability of directional error, and on a mountain with steep terrain falling in multiple directions and no visible landmarks, a wrong directional choice could not be recognized before it became irreversible. Being stationary under whatever cover was available gave them a better probability of survival than movement without sight. At roughly mid-morning, on the eastern side of the ridge at around 13,600 feet, they reached a shallow rock overhang, a small natural concavity in the rock face that reduced direct wind exposure from the northwest storm. In the confusion surrounding the storm's arrival, the 29-year-old recovered a Mylar emergency blanket that had been dropped earlier during the group's fragmentation. The two used it to wrap together and conserve body heat, remaining in close physical contact and staying stationary. They did not attempt to move again and remained in place through the storm and into the later hours of the day. Rachel Denton, according to a fragmented GPS track recovered from her device during the investigation, was located elsewhere on the mountain to the northwest, on the opposite side of the ridge in the same whiteout conditions. The tracking data is inconsistent and broken, consistent with disoriented movement in zero visibility, She had no effective navigation or communication, no situational awareness of other group members' locations, and no ability to coordinate or influence the outcome once the storm fully enveloped the ridge. Around mid-morning, the 41-year-old HR staff member, who had turned back near 13,200 feet, made it back down to the trailhead parking area. She came down through worsening but still manageable conditions below treeline, where the wind wasn't as strong and the snowfall was lighter. From there, she drove out along the dirt road to the main highway, and once she reached it, her phone finally picked up the signal again. Roughly an hour later, she contacted emergency services and reported that a guided group of 21 people was on the upper slopes of the Fitzroy-Cerro Torre Massif, caught in a severe storm system. She provided their departure time, intended destination, and the guiding company's name. Search and rescue operations were activated immediately. Ground teams were staged in El Chaltén within the hour, but aerial support was quickly ruled out due to extreme winds and near-zero visibility across the Massif, and sustained winds exceeding 50 miles per hour made helicopter operations unsafe. While lower elevation access remained possible, the upper ridge, where the group was last located, remained unreachable through the day. Conditions did not improve until after nightfall, when winds finally began to ease. As conditions stabilized that evening, multiple county search and rescue teams began ascending the mountain. Once access became possible, they located 2 survivors sheltering in a shallow rock overhang at around 13,600 feet. Both were conscious but suffering from moderate hypothermia and were evacuated. Shortly afterward, another team found Rachel Denton roughly 400 yards northwest on the opposite side of the ridge. She was alive but severely hypothermic, with an estimated core body temperature of 84 degrees Fahrenheit, and was evacuated for emergency treatment. And even at this point, you can see how survival and timing were basically the only things separating outcomes here. Recovery of the remaining 20 victims took place over the following 48 hours across a 1.1-mile search zone above 12,900 feet, concluding with the final recovery on September 16, 2016. All were found within the high-exposure alpine zone, with most positioned in postures consistent with late-stage hypothermia. Several were located in small groups, indicating brief attempts to remain together before immobilization. Others were found below the ridge on the wrong side of the mountain, consistent with disoriented movement in whiteout conditions. Autopsies determined hypothermia due to prolonged environmental exposure as the cause of death in all cases, with one additional fatal fall recorded as a contributing injury. A formal investigation later confirmed Rachel Denton had accessed a detailed regional mountain weather forecast the night before the climb, describing the incoming storm, held no guiding certification or wilderness medical training, and carried only minimal emergency equipment for a large group. The findings were referred for further legal review.